Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, as states across the nation ease coronavirus restrictions, President Trump says he is planning to resume campaign rallies this month. Trump campaign communications director Tim Murtaugh joins the rundown to discuss the commander-in-chief's re-election strategy, shifting the campaign to a virtual setting, and addresses criticism of the president's response to protests over the death of George Floyd. And November isn't just the presidential election. Fox News politics editor and co-host of the I Tell You What podcast, Chris Steyerwalt, breaks down this year's key congressional races, the battle for control of the Senate, and ticket splitting. Plus commentary by Fox News contributor and pastor of First Baptist Church in Dallas, Robert Jeffress. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Tom Shalhoub.
I'm Sandra Smith.
I'm Steve Ducey, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, June 10th, 2020. I'm Jessica Rosenthal. After a tumultuous few months, the Biden campaign appears to pick up some steam. But the Trump campaign says their numbers tell a different story as they get ready to campaign again for real.
Having a Trump rally is really would be a message to America that we can get back to the way that things were before the global pandemic hit.
I'm Lisa Brady. This year's multiple national crises could shake up a lot more than the presidential race, especially for any Republicans wanting to cut coattails.
If you are running for Senate, if you're running for governor, if you're running for the House, at some point do you start to separate yourself? Do you start to say, you need to keep me because the Democratic lunatics are going to take over and I'm the only thing that can protect you?
And I'm Robert Jeffress. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
It's been quite a year already, and it's not even halfway over. Rebooting 2020 jokes aside, President Trump's campaign is looking to shift gears. After months of quarantine and isolation for many, followed by weeks of protests, some of which turned violent, some of the polling has not looked too great for the commander-in-chief. He's been questioned about everything from his handling of the virus to how U.S. Park Police cleared protesters out of Lafayette Square before he took a picture in front of St. John's Church. While the Trump campaign has outraised Joe Biden's campaign overall so far in fundraising, Biden and the DNC's numbers were nearly even with the Trump campaign and RNC numbers in April. And Biden's campaign reported a surge in donations after the death of George Floyd. He delivered a taped message to mourners at Floyd's funeral service Tuesday.
Why in this nation do too many black Americans wake up knowing that they could lose their life in the course of just living their life?
But now, after a tumultuous few months, the Trump campaign is looking to hit the campaign trail again. And yes, that means rallies.
The president has been very eager to get back out on the campaign trail, and rallies are really the way that he connects with voters best. In person, loud, boisterous crowd.
Tim Murtaugh is the senior communications director for President Trump's 2020 campaign.
He's been wanting to get back out there, and we intend to do that. Sometime in the next 2 weeks, we'll announce the next Trump rally, and I think the pent-up energy and the pent-up enthusiasm will make this one one of the loudest, most boisterous rallies yet. You know, and this it keeps with the president's view that America has to get back to being open for business and back to action. Yeah. Having a Trump rally is really would be a message to America that we can get back to the way that things were before the global pandemic hit, and it will also serve the purpose of show the stark contrast between the energy of the Trump campaign and his reelection versus sleepy Joe Biden, who could only really conjure up images of such a loud, enthusiastic crowd in his dreams.
You talked about getting back to normal, like before, like how it was before the virus, but will it be, or will any sort of rally be a little bit different? Will there be any sort of accommodations with all the modifications that are supposed to be made because of the virus, or did the recent protests sort of end the need for social distancing in the campaign's mind?
Well, Brad Parscale, our campaign manager, will be very soon in the next day or so be presenting the president with a list of options for where the first rallies could take place, and with determinations for safety protocols would be made based on where the rally is and what type of venue it is. But I think we've seen the national media be sort of sitting from the sidelines and shaming people about social distancing and different precautions that they view that people have not taken when you see Twitter videos of people across the country who in the media's view were not doing appropriate social distancing. There were no such concerns raised when people were looking at the massive protests. So the video comes to mind is one in Philadelphia over the weekend. Yeah. And so we feel as though that the media really has forfeited the right to be social distancing shamers when they did not have concerns with other large gatherings, and if they raise it for the president and a rally for the president, I think it would show a great contradiction and general hypocrisy.
The protests that we're referencing, right, they were over the death of George Floyd. I want to ask you about that. The president has met with law enforcement and defended law enforcement. Does the president need to say something more about how black people feel about racism and the police? Where's the campaign on having the president make an address to the nation?
Well, I think the president has addressed the nation twice, once in the last week and then again 2 Saturdays ago. He has addressed the nation and specifically and at length addressed the killing of George Floyd. The president found it disgusting and horrific, and he has been very clear about that. And so the president has repeatedly in those 2 sets of remarks, speeches to the nation, and also in remarks that he's made at the White House. He had a roundtable with law enforcement officers, and the president is very concerned about what happened to George Floyd and does not want to see that sort of thing happen again, of course. But he also knows that no one hates a bad cop more than a good cop does. And he knows that 99.9% of the men and women who wear the uniform and go out and protect our communities every single day are good people, upstanding members of those communities who all they're doing every day is laying their lives on the line to protect their fellow citizens. President Trump supports the police, absolutely, and he does not want a few bad apples to spoil the bunch.
I know he's tweeted that that he's for law and order in all caps, not defunding police, and for responding more strongly, to the looting and the rioting that we saw following Mr. Floyd's death. From the campaign's perspective, though, as you look at appealing to and reaching out to that wider swath of voters, is some more sympathy in order toward how black folks are feeling and what they're saying they're feeling, especially as some polling is indicating that race relations are now moving to the top of the priority list. I mean, next to health care.
The president has repeatedly expressed empathy and horror and sorrow at what happened to George Floyd, and he understands those sentiments among black Americans. There's no question of that. However, he also knows that if we are to return to prosperity, you can't do that without peace, without law and order in those communities. Look, having the security to know that you can be safe in your own communities and be safe on the streets means having strong law enforcement. And these calls to defund the police or to dismantle police departments, this isn't something that the Trump campaign made up. This is a real movement within the Democrat Party. The Democrat defund the police train is leaving the station, and Joe Biden is a hapless passenger on that train, whether he knows it or not. He may give lip service to the fact that, oh, no, I don't support defunding the police. But elected officials in his party, people who are on his team, are supporters of his, visible elected supporters of Joe Biden's, are leading this effort. He could put a stop to it. He could say, this is nonsense. You guys all.
Well, he did, didn't he? He did say he doesn't support defunding the police.
He did not. He said I don't support defunding the police. And then he said, but what I do is I want to attach conditions to those funds with some amorphous, undescribed, ill-defined requirements on those things, on the funding.
Let's talk about polling. I know you're not necessarily a huge fan of polling in terms of taking them all too seriously, but it does look a little dicey in some of the key swing states. Biden is up over the president in Florida by a few points if you look at some of those polls, and I guess the latest polls out of Michigan have Biden up anywhere from 2 to 12 points. I know that's quite a spread, and I also know it's still kind of early, but what do you guys make of this?
Well, we never ever put any stock in public polling, and polls were proven wrong. If public polls were to be believed, then Hillary Clinton would be in the Oval Office right now. I mean, if you just take a look at the CNN poll that just came out earlier this week and made a lot of news, that is the most ridiculous poll that our team has ever seen, and CNN ought to be ashamed to have published it. In its sample, it counts only 25% of Republicans in their sample, which is ridiculously low. It is in no way reflects the makeup of this country. And also, that was a poll of random adults. They didn't even screen for registered voters. Fully 10% of the people who were questioned in that poll are not even registered voters. What sort of poll is that is trying to inform the public? No, it is trying to shape public opinion. It is trying to suppress the support for the president by issuing such a poll. It's garbage.
And didn't the president say he's hiring a firm to investigate that or to look into that poll?
Well, I mean, I think he was referencing our own existing pollster, which is John McLaughlin, one of the people who does polls for the campaign already. But the campaign knows. We know that our own internal data has consistently, over months, shown that we pay attention specifically to 17 states that we believe will make the determination of who the next president is. In those 17 states, we know that the president runs strong against Joe Biden, against a defined Joe Biden.
The president did recently thank Republicans for overwhelmingly supporting him. I think I saw that in a tweet. I assume that was based on some polling data. But how does the campaign plan to fight any PAC or Biden ads put together that, highlight some of the Republican lack of support for the president, like from Colin Powell or General Mattis or even Senator Murkowski, who's publicly wondering if she can vote for the president?
We know from our own internal numbers and from a number of public polls that the president enjoys the support of well over 90% of Republicans, over 90% of the Republicans. It is a historically united Republican Party behind President Trump. And so when we see these Beltway figures, inside the Beltway D.C. figures, the adoration of the Washington, D.C. Beltway media is a very powerful thing, and it is very alluring to some people. And so, we put no stock in that.
I know the issue I want to talk about the virus really briefly. I know the issue for a while was, coronavirus and the response to it. That's going to be a huge part of this election. It's going to be a referendum on how the president handled it all. But now that things are reopening and it's June and we're 5 months away from the election, and protesters in mostly blue states suddenly gave up distancing and really caring about those rules, does that reframe things for the campaign and for this notion of a referendum on how the virus was handled?
Every step along the way, Americans could see that President Trump was out front in public, very visibly leading the nation through the coronavirus crisis. He acted early. He cut off travel from China early on, but before the end of January. And at the time, Joe Biden criticized him for doing that, saying it was xenophobic and fear-mongering to do so. Now, of course, Joe Biden wants to say that he was the guy standing on the rooftops shouting for everybody to lock down and close the economy back in January. That's bogus. Joe Biden, if Joe Biden really did do that and really did have those thoughts, then why did he continue to campaign normally into the second week of March? So Americans know that the president has been leading the country through the coronavirus crisis, and now we know it is time to get the economy back open fully. We saw the incredible news last Friday of the May jobs report. Economists had predicted 8.5 million job losses for the month of May. Instead, the economy added 2.5 million jobs. The economists were only off by about 11 million jobs in the wrong direction. This is the beginning of the great American comeback.
Tim Murtaugh, thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is Robert Jeffress with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
What a difference 3 months makes. From the pandemic and the recession to the movement driven by George Floyd's death for law enforcement reform.
We cannot settle for anything less than transformative structural change.
But House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's version of that might not go far enough for younger, progressive members of her caucus, a split that could hurt moderate Democrats at the polls as calls to defund police gain traction, though right now there's also more than one version of what that means.
I tend to put this in the same category as abolish ICE and abolish private insurance, something that mainstream Democrats are going to reject pretty roundly.
Chris Steyerwalt is the Fox News politics editor.
You know, there's always going to be fringes, and the challenge for a party is always, can you harness the energy, which is always great, in the radical set without peeling off mainstream voters. I think you've seen the sort of the classic steps of the walk back, where it's like, well, by defund the police, what we mean is fund the police, but do it in different ways. And you're like, okay, all right, well, never mind then. So I think, like we saw with Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, any number of things that some Democrats gave enthusiastic assent for in the beginning, just a little more thinking, they realize that it's a political loser and won't even achieve the goals that they want. And they ditch it.
With everything that's happened in 2020, the pandemic, the economic plunge, now the movement really for police reform, what does that do to the battle for control of the Senate?
So the states where you have competitive Senate elections this cycle, so you have Arizona, Colorado, North Carolina, Maine, and those are sort of the big four. And then you look and say, okay, well, if this election got tippy one way or the other on the presidential level, then there's other states that come into play. But we have to always remember that these Senate races will substantially be a reflection of the presidential race, right? Like if Donald Trump wins Arizona by 5 points, Martha McSally is going to do a lot better. If President Trump loses Colorado by 15 points, Cory Gardner is not going to make it out, right? He'll just get shut up in that coffin. So a lot of this is a reflection of the national. Now, you could certainly say in a race like Georgia, where these issues have been intense, this is a race that is the Republicans, should they have two Senate races going on in Georgia. The one that we're watching most closely is the one where there is a horrible Republican primary between the incumbent Kelly Loeffler and Congressman Doug Collins. They've just been wasting huge sums of money and attacking each other. Joe Lieberman's son is among the Democrats looking to take on the it's a jungle primary system, so everybody's going to run and then they're going to run again. You could see how it could help Democrats down there if Collins, especially if Collins gets through, that there is an increased concern among all Americans, but also among Republicans, about police brutality towards African-American males. There is it's a thing. And you could see how in a state like Georgia, how if the Republicans end up with Collins after a tough primary, that this is an issue that could hurt him.
There have also been some states that have been steadily diversifying in their populations since the Republican gains in the 2014 midterms. And then you have the president's issues with support in the suburbs, women especially. If you contrast, the freshman Gardner in Colorado with the veteran senator, Susan Collins of Maine, she's been there for over 2 decades, someone who breaks with the president sometimes, but then sides with him on some hot-button issues like voting to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court. How much does it hurt a candidate like Collins when the president has this issue with support in the suburbs, with support with women?
Collins has been here before, right? Every 6 years of Susan Collins' career, we say this may be the one, right, that takes her out. I don't know how she's going to survive this one, but she has, because she has established a brand with Mainers as an independent person. And they have a senator who is an independent, and Angus King. The other senator is independent Angus King. Maine does not reward partisan loyalty. Collins' fear, though, is that there will be a backlash against her for questioning the president and that the state's Republicans will stay home. I think her real danger is that Democrats who are really united and really motivated this cycle are going to say no more exceptions. She's got to go because of Trump.
Do you think it's a harder year for moderate Republicans or moderate Democrats?
So we're almost 5 months away from the election. At this point, 4 years ago, Trump trailed Hillary Clinton by less than 3 points. Now Trump trails Biden by more than 8 points, and swing state polls tell the same story. He is materially worse off, demonstrably worse off than he was 4 years ago. So Republicans have to watch and wait and see. At some point, if you are running for Senate, if you're running for governor, if you're running for the House, at some point, do you start to separate yourself? Do you start to say, you need to keep me because the Democratic lunatics are going to take over and I'm the only thing that can protect you? So one of the things that we'll watch for are whether Republicans start changing their messaging as we go on. And that'll depend on whether Trump can get things turned around.
I mean, do these unusual times make it any more likely that people might split their ticket, vote against the president, but still vote in favor of an incumbent Republican senator?
So ticket splitting is very rare these days, but there is evidence to suggest that in blowout elections, and this is a matter of some debate, but there's evidence to suggest that in blowout elections, ticket splitting increases. That would be a logical thing that would happen, right? If a lot of people liked one candidate, then so to take the big blowout. So in years like 1972, 1984, 1964, where you have routes and big wins, yeah, there's ticket splitting. Now, is that ticket splitting defensive? That is to say, are people voting? Are they intentionally splitting their ticket, or are they voting one way on the presidential and then just reverting to their type, right, for the rest of the ballot? I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm voting this way. But everybody knows in the presidential, we're voting for, Captain Funbear Rainbow Pants, who's just the best and everybody loves him. So you could have that, or you could have the kind of strategic ticket splitting where people say, I'm going to vote for the other team for president, so I better make sure that I vote for the home team on legislative races.
What about a conflict with the president in some of these key states? Could that affect any of the Senate races? Like in North Carolina, where he's been sparring with the governor over convention rules, or in Alabama, where Jeff Sessions, his former attorney general, is trying to get his old seat back. The president's been backing Sessions' primary opponent, former college football coach Tommy Tuberville.
Well, I mean, there's always local issues. I wouldn't spend too much time thinking about Alabama, though. If you can get Crimson Tide fans to vote for a former coach of Auburn, you have demonstrated that partisanship trumps all. I don't think Doug Jones is gonna have a full term in the Senate, and I think everybody knows that. The whole thing is, if you're running for the Senate, if you're running for the House, you want to just make sure that you're in the zone where you can still win, right? And this may push you this way, this may push you that way. But if you're somebody like Tillis in North Carolina, Tom Tillis is going to do about as well in North Carolina as Donald Trump, I would suppose. And so he wants to make sure that he doesn't do anything that hurts him on the underside there. So he's made his bet, and he's going to ride it through. But it's mostly a top-down question. Sure, there's local stuff, but it's a top-down issue.
One last thing. We've got about 5 months to go till the election, but I saw it put a different way recently, less than 150 days. So that sounds like not a lot of time left. Is there enough time for, either side to still have a real chance in November?
Of course. Where were we 5 months ago? 5 months is a very long time. 150 days is a very long time, especially in a media environment that eats like a cowboy, right? A cowboy only has one dish, so he can only eat beans, and he can only eat chuck, and he can only eat that one thing at a time. So that's what we do. We focus on this, and then we're like, coronavirus? No, we're talking about police brutality. Oh, no. So we will have many people who think that the circumstances of this day will be the circumstances of Election Day have obviously not been paying attention. If you would have told us 6 months ago what the circumstances would be today, what the election would look like, how Joe Biden won the nomination, what we're talking about with conventions, all of these things, we would have said that's impossible. And yet here we are.
Chris Stirewalt, Fox News politics editor and co-host of the I'll Tell You What podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Power to the people.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network. Download and listen to Everyone Talks to Liz. Fox Business's Liz Clayman talks with entrepreneurs and executives about inspiring and motivational stories. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Robert Jeffress.
What's on your mind?
On May 22nd, President Trump observed, "In America, we need more prayer, not less." In light of recent events, I couldn't agree more. Now, perhaps more than ever, Christians need to come together to pray for America. Our houses of worship are essential places providing essential services, and we must begin the process of returning to our churches in a safe way. Almost every church in America has been shut down for months, even on Easter Sunday. The president pointed out that it's not right for some governors to allow liquor stores and abortion clinics to reopen, but require churches to remain shuttered. When he boldly stood up for religious liberty by calling for America's churches to reopen, that resonated with millions of believers around the country. After the president's remarks, he called me and made it very clear that he's not asking for churches to open capriciously. It ought to be done carefully, and it needs to be done now. Of course, each congregation needs to make wise decisions according to their individual situations. At my church, First Baptist Dallas, we have been very cautious about this. From the beginning, we have said that we are going to be data-driven, not date-driven. We heeded the advice of our federal, state, and local authorities. Recently, we observed an overall plateau in the number of COVID-19 cases in our area and a decline in the percentage of positive cases to overall tests. Based on these metrics, we prayerfully decided to partially reopen on June 7th. Our church opened at 20% capacity using a reservation system. In our contactless service, we didn't exchange printed programs or pass offering plates. Instead, we provided receptacles for offerings and decision cards. We encouraged social distancing and placed hand sanitizing stations throughout our campus. We also strongly encouraged everyone to wear face masks. Now, just because churches begin gradually reopening doesn't mean it is right for everyone to attend. At First Baptist Dallas, we encourage those who have underlying health issues or feel they're especially susceptible to this virus to stay home. We also stream our live services on our website. Regardless of whether people worship with us in person or at home, they are an important part of our church. Now, we've seen that tensions are high as people begin to go out into the community. I think one word that needs to characterize the way we interact during this time is grace. All believers need to exercise grace, love, and understanding toward one another, especially in this transitional reopening process. But it's clear that Christians across America are ready to get back to in-person worship in a safe atmosphere, and it's time for our nation's churches to reopen. This is Robert Jeffress, pastor of the First Baptist Church in Dallas, Fox News contributor, and author of the new book, Courageous.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust, and click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.